Cloud and Clear, the podcast by SADA for innovative business leaders and technology enthusiasts, where we explore how Google Cloud is transforming the industry and what that means to you. Now here's your host, Tony Safoian.
All right, welcome to Cloud and Clear. Chad Johnson, Head of Cloud Search at SADA. Nice to have you.
Thanks, Tony. It's good to be here. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, I just realized you've been here a little over 3 years now, but your experience in enterprise search, cloud search, etc., goes back, over a decade. We've known each other for a long time in the ecosystem. And I know a lot of the work you were doing originally goes back to the Google Search Appliance in terms of search on Google. And so, we like to call you the Michael Jordan of search. No one's done more of it. No one's had more success in the platform. So I think the audience has a lot to learn today.
My entry into search actually came about because of a couple of different things that I was doing in my career before that. When I got out of school, I had a computer science degree. I went to work for a consulting company and liked the idea of consulting because you get to work with different clients all the time. You're not committing to just one software product or company that you're working for. So I ended up at a company that had a partnership with a company called Tibco, and they were a kind of message bus, kind of like a MQ series. And we were working for some oil companies down in Houston doing data transmission. There were applications that didn't talk to each other. This was back in the early 2000s, and APIs were kind of hit or miss. And so Tibco was the glue that would connect everything. So we were writing essentially little adapters between applications to beam data back and forth between them. And the next company that I was at, they had a partnership with content management portals, so things like Vignette and Documentum, like an EMC partnership. And so I kind of took another little tangent into content management. So I spent, another 6 or 7 years as an architect doing large-scale content management projects. And that was also kind of application development. We were moving documents around. Things would get scanned in a scanner. Barcodes would get read. Workflows would get kicked off. And the documents would be stored in, kind of the equivalent of the digital filing cabinet. Yep. And what's the problem with the digital filing cabinet? You can't find anything. You got to be able to search for it, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So a lot of those content management products came with a search engine built in. A lot of them had things like Fast or Solar or something built in, and they were kind of terrible. They would crash. The index would have to get rebuilt. It would take, a couple of weeks sometimes to fully rebuild things and re-index everything. So we sought out a partnership with Google as an alternative. Google had this agnostic search engine, the Google Search Appliance, meaning it didn't have any loyalty with any one particular vendor. It could index anything. So we started building adapters, just like that first part of my career. We started building little hooks into content management systems and portals and CRM and pulling in data into the search engine. Like you said, I've been doing that for about 11 years now. I built up at my previous company, one of the largest practices in the world doing those implementations. I probably worked with 150 or more companies doing those kind of implementations.
Yeah, so the Google Search Appliance, a lot of people don't know, was actually kind of Larry and Sergey's first idea in terms of how to monetize the technology that just developed. Searching the web actually maybe even came later as sort of the folklore would say. So this idea of taking that type of technology and capability and moving it behind the firewall to help organizations discover their own data, as easy as it is now to search on google.com, certainly a need because of all the reasons you described, which is all these other systems, content platforms, file management systems. The biggest problem is discoverability, right?
Yeah. And people went home and said, I can do this at home. I can go to google.com and I can search what felt like an infinite amount of content. Do you remember back when they used to print how many pages they had indexed?
Yeah.
It was this many hundreds of billions, and then it was like a trillion. It's just like, this massive number. And then you get to work and you couldn't do that. You didn't have, you had more access to information at home than you did at work.
One of the stories we heard was a big automobile manufacturer, one of the big ones. They had a customer service function where people would call in and they would say, hey, I have a 2004 so-and-so and what's the part number for this? And the people that work there found it easier to Google in the public domain for their own specs of their autos than to search their own documentation, and they're the manufacturer. So that's pretty typical in terms of what people used to experience back then.
Yeah, I mean, we laugh about it, but it's true, and it's still true in a lot of cases. Obviously with enterprise search, we can search completely private stuff. I mean, that, for anyone that doesn't know, the big differentiator with Google Search Appliance and now Google Cloud Search is that it is like Google, but it's not that index. It's your own index.
That's
it's
right.
Your own stuff. You can push documents that only your employees are allowed to see. We can index things that only one person is allowed to see. We can restrict it down to the individual user level. The content doesn't have to be on the internet. It doesn't have to be published. It can come from your internal SharePoint or file shares. It can grab stuff from your SaaS products like Salesforce, ServiceNow, things that you subscribe to. Again, even if they're not public, they can be authenticated behind Okta or Google accounts, and we can still index it, and we can serve it up securely. It checks to make sure that you have access to see the document before it shows it to you as a search result.
So we're back to building connectors. The ecosystem had a bunch that were built for the Google Search Appliance. Cloud Search came out. We're building some of those. Do you want to kind of run through the ones that we have in market right now?
Yeah, Cloud Search came out officially about a year and a few months ago, and we've had access to it for about a year before that. We were one of the early adopters, and that was one of the first things that Google gave us was a toolkit for building connectors, because they knew that a search engine is only as good as the content that we can search. So I get asked every day, like, can you search, you name it, can you search ServiceNow? Can you search this like learning platform tool that I have? Can you search, Slack, or can you search Confluence or Jira? So we have been working through, we clearly don't have everything. I mean, there are thousands of enterprise applications out there. So you're kind of playing the bad client here, Tony, because everybody comes to us and says, like, do you have a connector for X? And, while we do have some, the other half of that answer is that we're really good at building them, and they've given us a really great framework for building them. So I don't know, 90% of applications these days have some sort of REST API or some sort of OAuth protected API. So a lot of times we're building from a recipe, from a cookbook. We've built connectors for things like GitHub and Confluence and Jira, WordPress, SAP HANA. Oh gosh, a learning management tool called PathGather. We're working on some custom ones for some clients now, where they've kind of created a homegrown CMS. We can index that. We're looking at like file system based things like Box. So yeah, we've got a really good inventory, and we've built a team of experts that know how to build them. So anytime someone comes to us, we go through a simple requirements gathering process. We understand, what do they want to index out of the application? How does the security model work? How does it tie back to like single sign-on or to your user directory, like Okta or Active Directory? And then our guys just crank out the connector. It takes a couple of weeks, sometimes a little more for more complicated systems. And we're done. The customer has a connector. And what that means is that now they can go to Google Cloud Search and they can search all of that content in Google Cloud Search.
So for people who haven't experienced, search behind the firewall, especially in the Google technology stack, but obviously everyone's familiar with google.com search. From a configuration standpoint, I mean, there's and development standpoint, I think enterprise search is both an art and a science. So what are some of the things you can do to kind of curate that experience for the enterprise, which might have very specific needs around how they prioritize content above and beyond the security framework, which is kind of obvious. Yes, you don't want people who shouldn't have access to certain documents to see them or even be able to find them. What are the other differences that the audience would love to hear about?
Sure. So if anyone is familiar with enterprise search and is aware of a lot of the common things that we do in these types of projects, they're probably familiar with things like, there's going to be some sort of spell correction for misspellings because we're all suck at spelling, right? And there's going to be conveniences. There's something called like stemming, which past tense, plural tense. We don't want to make the user have to be extremely literal. This isn't a database lookup. This should be a little bit user friendly, and most search engines have facilities for that. Language packs. We want to be able to do that stemming and pluralization and query expansion just as easily in German and Chinese as we do in English. So search engines have had a lot of these features. Many of them required some form of intervention to get them to populate them. Google has taken a lot of that out of the implementation process. So one, we've been talking about a private index, but Google is Google. They have a wealth of knowledge about how people search for things. They know that, this is kind of a silly example, but it was one that they used when they introduced this feature. If I say I've got a headache and I need some medicine, I might say, like, can you give me an Advil? But I could also say, like, could you give me a pill? Could you give me a ibuprofen? So there's a lot of different ways people ask for the same thing. Cloud search actually uses that. I mean, it's using public information to assist private search, but they're auto-populating those spelling dictionaries, those synonym dictionaries. So that's something that we run through the customers. But the cool thing, Tony, is we don't even have to do anything to get it working. It's just kind of included as part of the product. So other things that we work with on the customer experience, again, comparing this to public search, just because that's probably what a lot more people are familiar with. Enterprise search also deals with a lot of structured data. So yes, we index unstructured documents like PDFs, but a lot of things are coming out with metadata. Metadata could be part numbers, product numbers, publish dates, the names of the people that are involved. So with cloud search, we get to design a schema that accommodates not just the unstructured documents, but also all the structured data that goes with them. And then we can give the customer things like the ability to filter or narrow down their results. I once read an article that talked about the way that we think about information retrieval. And it's kind of like the who, what, when, why, where. We think obviously about the subject, but then we might want to narrow, like, let's say I was looking for a presentation. I remember the name of the client and I type in the name of the client and I get back, 30,000 results. And I'm like, oh God, now what? But then you start thinking, well, I remember that we worked on it in November. Okay, that really narrows things down. So that's the when. And I remember that I checked it into Google Drive. It's definitely not in NetSuite or SharePoint or else. It's definitely in Google Drive. So that's the where. And then I remember I was collaborating with John on it. So that really narrows it down. I can say, like, it was something that John was a collaborator on. So with Cloud Search, we can populate that metadata so that we can support those refinements, that ability to condense down thousands or hundreds of thousands of search results and whittle it down to just the one you're looking for.
Yeah, I think those are really important because customers can be very explicit about how they want that experience to feel. And they do expect more customization, obviously, than in Google.com because of all those business reasons you described. And I think it's really powerful to be able to build that into the user experience and even kind of role-based user experience, right? Which I think is a fantastic thing. So, we're coming off of Q4, which delivered, I think, the best sales quarter we've had for cloud search. We won some very big names. We can't call them out on this podcast, but the logos are impressive. And I think traditionally, even from your background, I remember in years prior with the GSA, we get to work with some of the biggest enterprises and the biggest logos, which is super exciting because this tends to be a critical but departmental initiative, which can get approved really fast because it's not overly expensive and it's sort of strictly a business decision. Of course, there's some IT involvement, which is necessary, but we're seeing just lots of momentum there. And I think what I really appreciate your team and our all hands, I got to meet all of them. They were all here, is how excited they were. I think the culture that you've built is admirable. And, it's also one of the most kind of profitable things, organizations that SADA has is literally like your cloud team is they're running on all cylinders. So I want to congratulate you on building that amazing culture.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you've been in consulting long enough to know that when you have a niche, when you have something very specialized, it commands good dollars. I can't go on the street and hire someone that doesn't have experience to do something like this. They've really got to touch everything from front end UI work, back end connector work, security. We arrive at company X and they're like, oh, we protect all of our applications with this like multi-factor, barrier and all these things. So like our team has to know about the full stack. We use that term a lot, but this is a true full stack product. Not to mention that we're touching all of their important things. We're pulling content out of Jira and we're accessing email and file shares, and every application works differently. And I've got some very, very skilled engineers that work on this product.
I really like talking about customers, and even if you can't name the names, that's fine. But what are a couple of great, customer stories that stand out where the work that you did resulted in some business outcomes that were really super interesting? And I think, I think about the customers that keep bringing us back to do more phases, which means obviously the work that we've done has added value and they want to invest more. But can you talk about a couple of customer stories that are interesting?
There's definitely no one size fits all. We don't limit ourselves to any particular vertical or industry. So I've got a ton of different ones I could think of. One vein of clients that we've had a really good run with is the pharmaceuticals and the life science companies that are frequently involved in things like clinical trials and drug development. There's a lot of, that process, and there's a lot of failure. There's a lot of attempts, and there's a lot of time that goes into developing new drugs. And anything that they can do to speed that up and give them a better chance of success on the next, blockbuster drug, that's huge for them. So they've built up a huge repository of clinical, preclinical, chemical analysis, all sorts of data about, not just the one that we see on the shelf at Walgreens, but the 100 attempts before that failed or didn't make it through certain trials. So we get a lot of traction with those companies being able to search back through that historical information to try to speed up the chance on the next drug. Very similar, we worked with a product company, a commercial goods kind of product company that same deal. Their R&D group would occasionally, hey, God, have we ever made this product in like this color with this flavor? We want to do something special for Christmas or something, or a branded product. And they will go back through their database of products. They use SAP, for example, and they store every trial they've ever done, even the ones that didn't work, but maybe they can glean something from that. They can find, that's how we, made that purple colored whatever, again, saving them time. The other kind of very different use case that I see a lot of is we interact with a lot of companies. We assume that when we call a company or we engage with a company through some sort of tech support process, even within our own company, they're omniscient, right, Tony? Like they know everything. Even the one they just hired last week, right? Like you get on the phone and you're talking to an agent, you expect them to know all the answers. So we do a lot of projects that are searching through knowledge bases and searching through tech notes and field notes. And a lot of times it's actually the employees at that company that are using our search solution to quickly answer a live phone call while the person's talking to them. So that's it needs to be fast. It needs to be so fast that you don't even we don't assume that, Fred in customer support is Googling it while we ask the question, right? But the truth is they are,
Yeah, it's such a frustrating customer experience when you call an organization you do a lot of business with, and they seem to have a less than comprehensive understanding of your history and relationship or status or anything like that. On the flip side, there's nothing more enjoyable as a customer when you call in, they seem to know everything. There's a lot of good technology behind that. It's not just culture and you hire good people, whatever, but the technology has to be there. So it feels instantaneous, like them understanding, what's likely to be the problem that you're calling about. Have you called in the past? What's the history of that conversation? But what is the composition of your relationship? What does that look like? Whether it's invoices or subscriptions or products you own, I think that's, super important. That's a great use case.
The last one that I'll give you is just to kind of remind people that cloud search doesn't have to be solely used internally because it is so fast, because it's powered at Google scale. It runs on the same infrastructure that Google.com does. We're starting to see ISVs and software applications use cloud search as its embedded search engine instead of them having to build their own. So let's say, for example, you and I, we're feeling kind of entrepreneurial and we go off and build a iOS and Android app that lets you, rate and review restaurants. I mean, just whatever. We all interact with those kind of applications, and most of them, the way you start off is by searching. You want to book a reservation, you search. You want to get a flight, you search. You're studying for an exam and you subscribe to some sort of test prep service. How can I help you? And you search. All of these applications have search built in. What you find is that many companies either try to find off-the-shelf search engines, open source search engines, because this isn't their core business, isn't their core product. So they roll their own. They try to build a search engine or they try to embed something. We're finding Google Cloud Search is a fabulous alternative, that it's managed, it's robust, it's foolproof, it works really well. It's got that Google-like feel where you just type in some keywords and you get results. And from an engineer's perspective at those companies, it's so simple. They just plug in an API to index the content. They plug in the other API to query it, and they're done.
Amazing. So much less work than the old way of doing that. Speaking of just customer experience overall, and call centers, etc., something that has evolved to be a very high priority for Google, TK, Rob on down, is, to me, what is like the first truly commercial, broad, market appeal, and sort of very explicit ROI based application of AI. And that's sort of the call center AI packaged offering that is in market now. And it's something that we've taken very seriously in terms of, exploring, investing in, partnering with sort of the call center, infrastructure providers, et cetera. And we've deliberately chosen, your team for you to own this and grow this out in terms of capability. And it seems maybe from the outside, how's that related? How does that make sense? But we had, conversations with Miles and with Dana about that fit, and I'm glad you were sort of very on board with embracing that. So what are your thoughts on call center AI or CCAI, and how does that fit with your experience and the work that Cloud Search and the other things that we've done in your team relate to?
Well, the first thing that we noticed was that the majority, and I mean a large majority, of our internally facing cloud search implementations, whether exclusively or in part, were being used by people at that company's contact center. Their support agents or their inbound agents were using the search because, like I said, they really are the people that need access to virtually everything really quickly. Another, an engineer or an employee at their desk may search a couple of times a day. The contact center agent is searching literally hundreds of times a day, every single phone call. So from that perspective, it made sense. From a technology perspective, contact center AI is, like you said, it is an interesting offering from Google. It does glue together a lot of the pieces that have been there, the dialogue flows, the natural language understanding, even just the text to speech part of it, the voice synthesis. I mean, that was kind of a thing of its own. And now it's all being brought together into this kind of virtual agent that talks to you for a little bit, tries to figure out the intent of your phone call. And it's doing that, the call tree job. It's trying to get you to the right person. Maybe it's even able to answer something without a person being involved at all, which is amazing. Search ties in some interesting ways because those agents allow you to call the virtual agent. The software lets you call APIs and look up data. And sometimes you get to a point in a conversation like that where there isn't a deterministic answer. It's not like yes or no, but it's like, I need to run a search and check on that for you. Or, maybe this answers your question. We've all kind of played around with, things like Siri and the Google assistants, and they occasionally be like, I think I found this on the web that might answer your question. And yeah. So, I think in most of those applications or those implementations, Tony, you're going to want to program some very specific dialogue flows and intents and actions. But in the end, if it gets sent to an agent, you capture all of that chat history. It captures all of the conversation to that point. We can take that text, search the knowledge base, and when the call is finally routed to a human, we can pop up on the screen the chat history and some, ServiceNow articles that are pertaining to what the person's been talking about with the robot for the last, 2 or 3 minutes.
Wow.
You have to search. It's there for them when they take the call.
The tie-in is fantastic. I actually haven't even thought about it that way, of the dialogue flow triggering Google Cloud Search tasks that, based on the results, kind of continue the workflow. And obviously, because of the speed and the scalability of the Cloud Search component, there's not going to be a big delay. It's going to feel much more natural to the caller. Yeah, I mean, look, the potential with contact center AI is huge. Again, the application is so clear in that, if an organization can cut down the amount of times that a human has to answer, that by the time that he gets to the human, there's all this sort of heuristic information that helps the human do the job, in a higher quality, make the caller feel heard, like all the 3 minutes they spent with the agent, that's dialogue flows, actually that information is transferred to the person so that the caller doesn't have to repeat themselves. It's a huge cost savings measure for any company that has a contact center, which, like, who doesn't? They all do. And also For the caller, it's a much better experience. They'll always get the phone picked up. There's no being put on hold. All this sort of stuff about queuing gets streamlined. I'm really excited about it. It's really new.
Talk about the ROI on projects like this. Like these third projects don't get done unless there's provable return on the investment. And it's difficult to prove that adding search to your website or adding search to your internet is really going to add much value. I mean, it's convenient, it's cool, but shortening the time that it takes to answer a call, deflecting a call through self-service before the person even calls, putting a nice search on your website that deflects the call, that proves ROI, and that wins us search projects.
And the customer experience is just so much better, and that's key. So it's like cost savings plus revenue increasing. I think that's a magical combination you don't see very often. What's exciting is sort of how that will evolve over time. Because when I talk to people about this, there's like, do people even, do they even make phone calls anymore? And I'm like, actually, they do quite a bit. And a lot of people, like I know when I'm driving, I try to get some things done. I'm calling into some call center sometimes, right? Or contact center. And the reason that people call less than they used to some extent is obviously because there's more information available that's searchable. But some people have given up. Like it's such a bad experience in aggregate that people haven't, they've started calling less. But if it was a better experience, of course they would call more because you can't always type.
You've probably called a company and you got transferred to probably an overseas, very crowded room. You can barely hear the person. You're hearing 3 other conversations behind them. Compare that with like a crystal clear computer generated AI powered voice that, like you said, you can do from your car and it just works. It's faster.
What's also terrible is like going through an IVR process that's quasi-automated and you're giving them all this information. And when you land with the human, they don't know anything you've told that IVR system like for the last 3 minutes. So I think the potential of CCAI in itself, but especially in combination with cloud search, I think we're going to be able to deliver an incredible solution to some of the largest enterprises in market. And I know it's still relatively new, but it is a huge priority for Google. And I intend to play a big role in their go-to-market strategy with some of their top customers.
Yeah, our team's very excited about it.
In summary, what are you looking forward to in 2020? We just had our all hands. This is the first year we're going, starting the year being sort of 100% Google Cloud focus. So what are you most excited about?
Well, last year was a bit of a transition year for us because it was the deprecation of the Google Search Appliance and kind of offboarding customers off of that product and getting them migrated onto cloud search. That's over. The Google Search Appliance is dead. Long live the Google Search Appliance. All of our opportunities for this year are, maybe they're migrating off of something else. I don't want to, totally dismiss that, but I am excited to look for these kind of net new opportunities with search. We're having to be a little bit creative. We're trying to find those value propositions for customers. We're looking into the ISV model that I talked about. We're looking into these AI-powered search assistants. That gets me way more excited than just migrating somebody off of the yellow box onto the cloud. So to me, that's kind of my excitement for this year.
Excellent. I'm also excited to be completely focused on Google Cloud and building all these amazing new capabilities. Google Cloud Next is coming up. We're getting ready for that. Should be super exciting. But I really want to thank you for all the work you've done, all the patience and investment with Google, which, we've all been patient, but it should be a breakout year in a huge way. If Q4 is any indication, we're going to have some great work to do in 2020. And I just want to thank you and your team for all the excellent work that you do. Consistency, it just makes all of our jobs easier, certainly for the sellers, but also for us as executives at SADA. To be so proud of your practice.
Yeah, thank you so much. And SADA is an amazing place to be doing this. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Cloud and Clear. Check the show notes for links to this week's topics. And don't forget to connect with us on Twitter @CloudandClear and our website, sada.com. Be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app.